Well, today we're going to be starting a new project. It's disassembling an overhead valve engine. Alright, the first thing we're going to do is disconnect our spark plug, like so, and remove this top cover. It's held by three 5/16 inch bolts. We'll just do that quick enough. Okay. Next we're going to be removing the air filter. Ooh, that looks terrible. We'll have to clean that up. Okay, we're going to remove the air box. It's two 7mm bolts and an 8mm bolt. Okay, let's remove the air box. There's a hose on the back. This is the fuel line. We want to clamp that off with a locking pair of pliers. Don't do it too tight, just something similar to that. Grab that pipe clamp, pull it back, and the hose will come apart from the carburetor. Alright, with that fuel line disconnected from the carburetor, we can just lift up on the gas tank. Put that into a container, release this, and you'll have emptied out your fuel. Okay, now all we have to do is grab the carburetor and just pull it toward us. It should come right out, just like so. And remember our linkage here. And a little fuel will pop out. There's our carburetor. Alright, we're going to be removing this crankcase breather tube. Like so. Our linkage. Like that. And our secondary spring. Like that. I have two bolts right here. They're 8mm holding on this carburetor cover. We'll remove that next. And keep your spacer all together. Next we're going to be removing the coil with these two 1/4 inch bolts. There's an electrical connection right here. Just unplug that. There you go. We're going to be using an impact gun to remove this bolt right here. It holds our starter cup and our flywheel on. Easy enough. Using an air chisel placed right here and a bit of leverage, we're going to pop that flywheel straight off. Just like so. Here's our timing key. It's right here. This cover is held on by 5 8mm bolts that we're going to be removing right now. When you remove it, our crankcase breather cover. Our brake assembly is held on by 2 screws right here. They're 8mm, and that connects our grounding wire to our coil. Okay, this protective cover of our muffler is held on by 3 1/4 inch bolts. We'll just remove those now. The muffler is simply held on with 2 8mm bolts that we're going to remove now. This engine, believe it or not, they didn't give me a drain plug for the oil, so we're just going to remove it from the pour spout. Okay, let's remove our governor arm right here, and that's with a 10mm bolt, and then just pry this open. Okay, let's remove the spark plug. That's a 5/8 inch socket, and as you can see, with spark plugs on an overhead valve, the part that screws in is much longer than a head that is an L head. See that? And that's to reach deeper into the engine to put that spark closer to the piston. This is the bracket that held our governor spring, and it's just simply an 8mm bolt. We're going to remove that right now. Our valve cover is held on with 3 8mm bolts. Let's take those off now. Just gently tap that with a rubber. Comes off just like that. Okay, we're going to be removing these rocker arms now. They're held on by 2 8mm bolts. And when we pull out the push rods and the springs, we want to retain all of these as a unit. Make sure that you don't interchange them. Okay? And also mark which end of the push rod goes into the engine. The head is held on with 4 10mm bolts. And what I like to do is crisscross it when I take it off so that I don't distort it. If you'll notice on top of the piston head, there's a small indentation right here. That's for the direction of the placement of the piston. You want that pointed toward where the magneto goes, and the magneto was mounted right here. On the bottom of our motor is the sump cover, and you'll notice that we have 7 bolts that are 3/8 inch, and now we're just going to remove them and split the motor apart. When I break it loose, I do a diagonal. I don't just go all the way around. Alright, all of the sump bolts have been removed, and I'm going to just carefully hit it with a rubber hammer and knock this thing apart. I've got 2 seals still in it, and I should be able to leave them in. They're going to have to be replaced, but I'm going to see if I can pull it without removing the seals. So let's see what we can do. Broke right apart. Look at that. There you go. We'll look at this closer in a moment. Alright. This is our oil slinger. Pull that out. This is our cam gear. We'll pull this out. Now, when you remove your tappets, make sure that you put them back in the same hole that they came out of. You don't want to get them confused. Okay, this is our crankshaft gear. And then, this is our governor right here. We'll remove that in a moment. Then we're going to remove these 2 bolts and remove our connecting rod. You want to mark this. You want to put a witness mark so that you put it exactly together the way it came apart. Sometimes it'll only go together one way, but if not, always get in the habit of putting a witness mark right here. And we're going to clean all this up in the parts washer, analyze it, and then we'll put it back together. By rotating the crankshaft, I can get my ratchet in there. It's 2 8mm bolts, and I've already put my witness mark on it. And just remove it, and then we'll remove our crankshaft. Alright, pushing up on our connecting rod, I'm pushing out our piston. Here it comes. There she is. And now our crankshaft comes right out. The only thing left is our governor, and I don't think I want to remove that just because of this difficult spring washer. They don't sit really well. We're going to take a screwdriver. I'll show you. I'll remove one just to show you how easy they are to pop out. Taking a large screwdriver, put it up against your seal, and just pop it right out like that. And we'll remove the one that's in the sump also the same way. Alright, let's clean these parts up. I thought I would just briefly discuss the two different types of engines we have here. This is the one we're currently taking apart, and it's called the overhead valve. And you'll notice in the head are the exhaust and intake valves. Okay. In the engine that we took apart last time, the valves are not in the head. Okay. That's the primary difference between the two types of motors. In the motor that we took apart last time, the valves were in the engine block itself, where these valves will sit over the piston. If you remember, when the valves were located in the engine block, it was kind of difficult to remove the valves. You needed a spring compressor, a little bit tricky. This engine is super easy to remove. When you have an overhead valve, all you have to do is remove the little caps. And if you notice right here, we have the same type of retainer. It's called the keyway. All you have to do is press down and move it to the side. And that's it. The valve has been removed. And that's all there is to it. And you want to retain this as a complete set. Don't be interchanging the retainer and the springs and the cap with the exhaust valve. Nothing to it. Alright, that wraps up our disassembly of this overhead valve engine. Well, the first thing that we're going to do is install the piston into the crankcase. And you'll notice on the piston head there's a little indentation. That means that we're going to be installing that just like this, where that indentation points toward the magneto. And the magneto gets installed on these two studs right here. So we're going to have that pointing toward these two studs. On the internet, you hear a lot about ring placement. They like the rule of thirds, where you have one, you see how they have a joint right there? They want one joint here, and one joint here. That's great, but as the piston moves up and down, these rings do rotate. And eventually, they're going to work their way where they're in alignment. And everybody goes, well, you're going to lose horsepower. The engine moves so quickly, and the alignment will then shift out of there, even just a little bit. And the lack of horsepower, or the loss of horsepower, is so insignificant. Don't really worry about that. But again, you want one of the joints like here, one joint here, and one joint like over here. Just for a reminder, the top one is your compression ring, your second one is your wiper ring, and the third set is your oiler rings. Another thing you want to do is liberally oil the bore, and you want to also oil your ring compressor. So that's what we're going to do right now. You don't want this too tight because you want the piston to be able to slide out of it. That should do it. We'll install it just like that. And let me tap it into place. And if you feel some resistance, stop, because you got a ring that's jammed up, like I do. There you go. Right. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to be installing our crankcase. We have to put a liberal amount. I'm going to put grease in here. And what's nice about the grease is when it heats up, because before the engine starts, there's not going to be oil in these little cavities. And by using grease or wheel bearing grease, as the engine heats up, it'll melt away and then the oil will go into those areas. But it gives it a better start or a better chance for lubrication. So let me do that next. Okay. And I'm also going to put it in where our seal is going to go. Before I get too far into that, let me tell you about our seals. I purchased them in a kit. It cost entirely with tax $16.23, and it's Briggs & Stratton 592640. Okay, and that'll have all our new seals in and everything else. Get all our seals right here. These are our seals. I'm going to put a little bearing grease around the outside. I'm going to find a socket that is about that size, and I'm going to press it in with a socket, and that's what we'll do next. Let me put a little, just to help seat it. And remember on the bottom that I have this governor right here. I gotta make sure I don't distort. Now I am going to use the socket to seat that because I want to make sure that it seats all the way down. Alright, now we're going to install our crankshaft, and I want to lubricate right here our journal and eventually where the sump cover is going to go. So let's put a little bit more bearing grease on this. Actually going to go on this side. Let's get our journal. It's going to go in just like this. So, watching our connecting rod, I'll slip it in like so. See that? See how that nestles in really good like that? Now I'm going to put a little bit more bearing grease on this, and if you'll remember, some will only go on one way, but we put witnesses on this, little scratch marks, and that's where we're going to align it with. So let's do that. A little bearing grease. And again, this grease will melt, and as the oil slinger starts operating, it'll start putting oil where they need to be. So this goes here. And I have the torque specs. This is 90 inch-pounds, and that's what we'll be doing. It's time to install our valve tappets. And if you'll remember, they're going to ride on our camshaft. I'll show you that in a little bit more detail in a moment. Again, let's put a little bit of bearing grease on it. Not a great deal, but just, so that we don't have metal against metal when this thing starts up. Now, if you can remember where it came out, try to put it in the same hole that it originally came out of. This one was the one that was closest to the magneto, so I'm going to put it back in there. Let's put a little bit of bearing grease on this one. There. Next, we're going to be installing our camshaft, and that's going to go right in here like so. So again, a little bit of bearing grease right on the end so we don't have metal on metal. Now, if you'll remember, the camshaft and the crankshaft gear, right here, it's down in. Well, we got to put the crankshaft gear on first, and there is a washer right here. We're going to put on. And stick in our camshaft gear, and if you'll remember, on both gears are a timing mark. This one has a little indentation. You can see it right there. And the crankshaft has it right there. They have to line. I'll give you a clearer shot of that in 1 second. Alright, now it's time to install our oil slinger, and this is part of our governor so that the motor stays at a constant speed. And we're going to put a little bearing grease on this nub of the camshaft, just like so. And as the engine speeds up, these little arms are going to flail out. Okay. Alright, just like we put the seal in the crankcase, we need to put another seal right here into our sump cover. Again, put a little grease on this, a little grease on the inside of it, and knock it down with a socket that's just large enough, and that'll press it in all the way down. And we can then install our sump cover. So that's what I'm going to do right now. You might want to check on your crankshaft around for some burrs, especially around where the keyways were machined, so that when we install this, it doesn't accidentally rip our rubber seals. So just place it in like that. And then just kind of seat it originally with a rubber mallet. Okay? And then using a socket, go ahead and seat it down. Just like that. Again, we're going to now apply our sump cover, and the torque specs on the sump cover are again going to be 90 inch-pounds. And I put axle bearing grease on the crankshaft. I put some on the end of the cam gear, and I put some inside the sump cover and on the seal that we just applied. And now we're just going to carefully, and I want to put some right here too. This is where the end of the camshaft fits. Might be a little bit much. But again, as the engine gets hot, this is going to melt out of the way, and then oil is going to go in there. I'm going to apply my gasket now, like so. And if you'd like, you can use a gasket sealer. Normally, the rule of thumb, again, is the sealer would go on the part that gets removed. So the sealer would go on the sump cover. And I think I will apply a little bit of that. You don't need much. Too much is a bad thing. I hear a lot of guys complain that when they go grab this thing apart, it's on the internal parts. So just careful, slide it down. There we go. That's all there is to it. When you put your sump cover bolts in, torque it down so that you get even pressure, and don't do it all at once. You know, tighten it up a little bit, and then 30 pounds more, and then 30 pounds more, and again, go in a diagonal crisscross pattern. All right, we're going to be installing our push rods now for our valves. And if you remember, we remember which hole they're supposed to go into, and we remember by tape which end of the rod points toward the engine. Okay? So you should always try to get in the habit of removing a part and putting it identical back in. Now these are going to set down. You notice right here, these are the tappets that we installed for the camshaft, and they're going to go in like so and like so. Okay, and then the head is going to fit over them after we put the head gasket on. You see that? Okay. And then slide the head gasket. Now when you tighten your head gasket, just like we did the sump cover, the torque specs on the head were 250 inch-pounds, and we're going to go in a diagonal fashion again. Don't tighten it all in one shot. Do a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, and keep working it around, and then go down to 250 inch-pounds. When I'm done, I'll catch you on the other side. We're going to adjust our valves now. And before you do any adjustments on a valve, you have to bring the cylinder up to what they call top dead center. And you want both valves closed. So take anything that a screwdriver is good. What you want to do, be careful not to bind it in the spark plug hole, but turning the crankshaft, can you see what I'm doing? I want to get this thing all the way to the very top, just before it comes back down. And I'm right there. Okay? That's top dead center. Let me show you how to adjust your valves. If you ever have a riding lawnmower and it clicks, and the first thing that you've got to think of is either my battery's bad or my starter's bad. A lot of the times it's just that your valves need adjusting. There's too much compression so that the starter motor can't turn the engine over. Our specs here are adjusting these from 4 thousandths to 8 thousandths. And that's both of the valves, by the way, intake and exhaust. So we're going to set these at 6,000. Now let me show you a little bit how this works. The one end fits over the push rod. Okay. The other fits over a stud. And then the other end, right here, is again our valve. And this is going to go like this. And the way it does that is with this bolt. Okay? It's got a little bit of a moon shape on the bottom that allows it to pivot. In the center of this nut is another little bolt that has an Allen wrench fitting. Okay? So you adjust this with a 5/16 box wrench and an Allen wrench like this, and I'll show you what that does. What this center one does is it will top out on this bolt, on the stud that's coming up. Let me just demonstrate. It's easier to show you than that. And what I did was, like I said, it's 4 thousandths to 8 thousandths. So I just went through the middle and said 6 thousandths is my feeler gauge. What I'm going to do is just stick it between the top of the valve and the rocker arm. I'm going to bring it on down just till it's snug. I don't want it tight. I want to be able to easily pass it through it. I have to adjust my Allen wrench out a little bit because I got to go down a little bit further. Right about there, you see that? And then I'm going to tighten my Allen wrench. Just like so. Well, let's install our overhead valve cover, and first let's apply our gasket. Goes just like that, and then put our 3 bolts down. Next we're going to be putting on our governor arm. Hear that inside there? And that goes right like so. And that's what our throttle is going to hook onto. So just tighten that down and you're ready to go. This is our crankcase breather valve. It's a reed valve. And unlike a lot of them, it's not really, it's part of this cover here, the blower, part of the blower housing cover, or one of the parts of the blower housing cover. Simply enough, put a little gasket sealer around here and then put our bolts in. Alright, it's now time to install our flywheel, which is simple enough. If you remember, we had a small key, okay? And it fits in this channel right here. And in the flywheel, there's a small groove right there. See that right there? Okay, that's for our electrical timing. Our flywheel has magnets built into it, right here. And as the flywheel spins past it, it creates a magnetic field. And then as it goes further around, it breaks that magnetic field and it sends a pulse or a very sharp voltage through this wire and allows our spark plug to ignite the fuel and air mixture inside our cylinder. Just like that. And then taking our starter cup, set that out here, and there's two indentations right here with two wings right here. They have to sit into there. There's our little washer. And then torque this nut down to 35 foot-pounds. Alright, we have our flywheel torqued down, and now we're going to install our coil. And you'll notice that the coil has these grooves cut in it for these bolts. That's so that they can slide forward and backward. And the reason for that is we have to set the gap between the coil and the flywheel. And I'll show you how that's done. It's simple enough. Just bring them on down. Don't tighten them yet. Kind of a loose fit. Okay. And then taking an index card or a business card, go ahead and stick it in between the coil and the flywheel, like that. And then turn the flywheel until the magnets pull our coil down. Right there. And tighten that on down. That's the proper setting for the distance between our flywheel and our coil. That's all there is to it. Next, we're going to install our muffler and its safety enclosure. That's simple enough. Just these two bolts again. And this is 5/16. And then once I get that down, put the 3 bolts that hold our cover on. All right. The next thing that I did was I put our flywheel brake on. This is that handle on your lawnmower. And when you let go of it, it'll put a brake onto the flywheel and stop it, supposedly within 3 seconds. And there's also a small wire that feeds underneath and attaches to our coil right here. Don't forget to do that. Okay. The next thing that we're going to do is attach our carburetor. The unit goes like that. Can you see that? Make sure you put this groove toward. We have our linkage here that we've got to put in, and you just push it down like that. Take your carburetor, put it through the hole, and that's all there is to it. This white piece is going to slide through this hole right here, this groove, and you've just connected your carburetor to the engine, just like so. And this is a governor spring also. You want to put that in. Through this little hole. See that? And then down through like that. And if your idle speed is too slow, you can just bend this bar a little bit back and it'll make the engine go a little faster. The second thing that we have to install now is the air box. And the air box is held on with 3 little bolts. And right here you can see this tube. This tube connects right here. this tube connects right here to the crankcase. A little hole right there. It goes like so. And it goes in that hole. Put your 3 screws in, your air filter, and top. And this part's done. Now it's the time to install the gas tank. That's simple enough. These 2 clips slide down here, and this clamp hose gets placed right there. So, as you can see, piece of cake. And then we're going to connect this hose right here. The next thing that we have to do is put 15 ounces of 10-weight motor oil into the engine and install our spark plug. And then the last thing is our housing. So let me get caught up and I'll catch you putting on the housing. And the last thing that we have to install is the blower housing starter. Okay. And that is just 3 bolts that are 5/16. And once done, bum-ba-da-bum, we put it on the lawnmower deck, install our lawnmower blade, put some fuel into it, and let's see if this thing will run. Well, we've taken this overhead valve 4-stroke motor apart, looked at all of the parts, and we've just reassembled it, put it on the deck, put the blade on, we put oil into the engine, and we put gas into the gas tank. Let's see if it works. Okay, I just primed it.